Thank you for joining us here today on From the Heart, where we tell stories of life because life is interesting. Today we're in the home of Miss Wendy Jean Garrison, and she's going to be talking to us about her house and about her music and about her life. Thank you for joining me today.
It's great to see you again. Yeah, and welcome.
So, will you tell us your whole name and how long you've been here?
My name is Wendy Jean Garrison, and I moved to Mississippi in 1987, made it my home. So I've been here for over 30 years. I am originally from the Washington, D.C. area. My father's family is native to Maryland and go back 8 generations or so in Maryland. But I went to college out of state and then moved around a bit and wanted to move to a place where I could have a lot of land. And little did I know what I was in for moving to Mississippi. But it's my home now. Well, it goes back to Cornelius Garrison, who, interestingly enough, well, we know he was in the Revolutionary War. And just in the past year, my sister, well, we had sort of a family heirloom, which was a gun of some sort that he had possession of. And she was moving and downsizing, and she took this gun with all the family documentation to Mount Vernon and asked them if they would like to put it on display. She was pretty bold. And to our surprise, they said, yes, we would love to. And they put it in one of their special exhibits. And last November, we all got together and went to Mount Vernon and got a special tour. And we get to see our family's heirloom with a little blurb about it at Mount Vernon. This last time I was home to visit my mother, we went up to the cemetery where all my ancestors are buried at in Moncton, Maryland, at St. James Episcopal Church. And there are a lot of Garrisons at that graveyard, but we found the tombstone of Cornelius Garrison and also of his wife, Susanna.
So you moved to Mississippi. Who came with you? You got a job also when you moved here?
At first, I had left my job in Illinois, so at first I was free of working, and I met some people in the Sierra Club. We had a local Sierra Club at the time. We don't have one in town anymore. But we got interested in recycling, and pretty soon I found myself recruiting interest in starting a recycling center in Oxford. And unbelievably enough, the city worked with the Sierra Club. We worked as volunteers, and they provided their paid employees to be involved in this project. And many a time I went to meet Mayor Leslie in his drugstore on the square, where a restaurant, I think it's Bourrée, is now, but that was Leslie Drugs at the time, and he was the mayor. And I basically became a gadfly around City Hall, like asking for this and that, asking for trucks and asking for people to help us with this project. And we ran the recycling center, the Sierra Club, jointly with the city of Oxford for about a year and a half until the people that bought our glass and newspapers, they said they couldn't buy anymore. I went back to school. I went to the University of Mississippi and got my PhD in biology. I already had a master's degree, and that was a fabulous experience, just learning, and you didn't really know if you could do it, and you became very close with the other graduate students in the department. And then after I got my PhD, there was a position open for an instructor that they encouraged me to apply for. So that's what I did, and that was a great fit. So I taught in that capacity for about 20 years. I started my PhD in 1991, and I taught the labs as a graduate student. And then in 1996, I was hired as an instructor of biology. I retired from there it was the end of 2015. Well, one of the most memorable things I got to do was to teach the study abroad class in Costa Rica. And I ended up doing that 4 times over the years. But to take a group of students and be responsible for them and try to open their eyes to the rainforest and the relations in the rainforest and natural resources in the rainforest, and how people use the rainforest, the natural resources, from everything from coffee plantations to banana plantations. So we toured those. We thought about uses of resources. Is it sustainable? Is it not sustainable? How does it work? What is going on? Are some of them subsidized or not subsidized?
And you play guitar. That's how we got introduced, and I loved it. It was a great time. Tell us about your experience. Go in a little more depth about how you got into the guitar.
I will say that when I was young, I got to take piano lessons. My grandparents were very, very supportive, and they bought the family a grand piano when I was in grade school, and that was really something. And the whole family took piano lessons, including my father, who was a physicist, and he learned to play some lovely classical music. And we all took piano lessons, so I learned the scales, I learned a little bit of theory. Then probably when I was 12 or 13 and Peter, Paul, and Mary were big, and I wanted to be like Mary. And I asked my parents if I could have a guitar. And wisely enough, they said, well, we'll get you lessons. We will rent you a guitar. And if you like it, and if you stay with it, then we'll talk about getting you a guitar. So I did do that. I took lessons on this very sort of a cheap guitar, and it had very high action. It really hurt my fingers, but I guess I must have learned a few chords, because after a while they did buy me a guitar, which I still have. I don't play it because it's kind of an antique by now, but I still have it. So I knew a little bit about playing guitar. I didn't play it publicly, but I'd always liked music and always either taken piano lessons or guitar lessons, no matter where I was. So when we first moved to Mississippi, I clearly remember sitting in the grove and not knowing a single solitary person in all of Mississippi. I just, I'd left all my friends and I just didn't know anybody. So I thought, well, I will take guitar lessons again, because that's sometimes what I did in a new place. So I went over to the Blues Archive on the campus of the University of Mississippi, and I just walked in and I said, can somebody teach me some blues guitar? And again, little did I know what that meant in Mississippi. So there was an assistant, or he was a staff person, Walter Liniger, at the Blues Archive, and he said yes. He said, just come in. He said, don't pay me, but if you could make a contribution to the Blues Archive every time we do a lesson, that'd be great. So $15 or something at the time. And I would just call him up the day before if I wanted to come in, and he got me started on slide guitar. He considered himself more of a harmonica player, but I later found out that he, at the time, had a grant from the Mississippi Arts Commission to work with James Son Thomas. Of course, I knew about James Son Thomas, a bluesman from Leland, but I didn't really know about the Mississippi Arts Commission. So Walter got me started, showed me how to tune the guitar, and he said, go down to Ron's guitar store. It's Ron Lackey, and at the time he was on University Avenue. And he said, Ron, I'll fix you up with a slide, the slide. So I went and I met Ron, and if you know Ron, you just start talking to him, and you just become friends with him. So we talked for a long time. And then he said, well, I don't have a slide that will fit your finger, my little finger. So he said, go to Napa Auto Parts and ask him for a socket wrench and get one that fits on your finger. So I went to Napa Auto Parts and I said, I need like a socket that will fit on my finger. And they humored me. They didn't really bat an eye. They just brought them out till I found one that fit on my finger. So I still have that same slide. So often I would go in and Walter would show me some more things. He directed me to to Russ College where they had a blues and gospel festival. They don't have it anymore. But I went there and was just amazed at all the people cooking and just having a great time. And there were people on the stage better than anyone I'd ever seen on TV or anywhere else doing both blues and gospel. That's how I got started. And then I kept doing both kinds of guitar, but eventually the slide was a little bit more unusual. There's a million good guitar players around, and the slide was something a little bit different. And so I tried to specialize.
You don't write your own music, but you do interpret other people's music. So tell us a little bit about what has influenced you on interpreting.
What has influenced me interpreting music is probably just what I have listened to, and what appeals to me is kind of that Nashville sort of sound, which is, I know that the Nashville sound is a pedal steel, which is completely different than what I do, but that is the sound that I like. So I go after that kind of. And another thing that influenced me was gospel hymns. So when I joined a church in 2011, I joined the church, and I had the opportunity to play with a wonderful pianist, LaRonda Kelly, played piano, and we just found that we clicked when I played slide guitar and she was playing the piano for different hymns. It was beautiful. It was gorgeous. And I just, in that case, what influenced me was just wanting to play those old hymns that are part of everybody's childhood, I think, whether or not you're religious. My childhood was not especially religious, but yet some of those things like the old rugged cross or In the Garden, things that everybody knows, or it's in the back of your mind and you've heard them. And when I was able to play them on slide guitar, and more than that, when I was able to get a hymnal which had it written out, and I translated that in my mind to slide guitar because it's written for piano. Every Sunday morning, you knew for a fact people were going to be in the church and they were going to be glad to hear you play.
You have your puppy dog here. Who's the puppy dog?
This is Dipper. He's 16 or 17 years old. We got him from the Oxford Humane Society way back when, and he's doing great, but you can see he walks, he's healthy, but right now he's feeling a little bit nervous, so he's walking around a lot. Sometimes he always needs help going down the steps, and but he just went out before y'all came, so I don't think he really wants to go out. I think he just really wants to know who's here and what's going on and wants a little bit of attention. And we have another dog. She's in her safe place right now, and she's not as old as Dipper.
So you have spasmodic dysphonia. Tell us about when you first noticed it. Bring us up to speed.
When I first noticed that I had something wrong, which I later found out was spasmodic dysphonia, at the time I was teaching fairly big lectures at the University of Mississippi, and I would have to project my voice to about 100 people for 50 minutes, 3 times a day. So that is quite a strain on your voice. And I experimented with different sound systems. I experimented with a clip-on microphone, and eventually the department did install speakers for me, but at my request, but they're used by everybody. But when I really knew something was wrong was that I started to feel very faint when I was lecturing. And so at first it did not appear to me as a voice problem. It appeared to me, I don't know why I'm so faint when I'm trying to project my voice to 100 people. So that began me going to doctors, and at first they thought it was asthma and gave me some medicine for that. I sort of knew that it wasn't that because I had never had asthma. And after a while, I saw a couple more doctors, and I got referred to speech therapy at the University of Mississippi. And they have a great department there, so I did probably 6 months or a year of speech therapy, which involved doing different exercises some of those exercises I still do, like speaking in like January, February, March, April, May, June. I still do that to warm up if I'm going to have to talk to someone on the phone. And then there were some other things that were not that helpful. And then I also experimented with movement. Jennifer Mazenko was teaching a class on the Alexander technique, where you just become very aware of yourself and how you move, and that is helpful with some types of voice problems. And then Dr. Julia Aubrey, who's a singer and a department chair, I think, or she's in charge of the Ford Center now at the university. I took a number of lessons from her, and she taught me some helpful things about like standing up and wearing high heels so you could project yourself better. And she also had a theory that if you're just speaking so loudly, your vocal cords are just, the minute you take that breath, your vocal cords are like, oh no, we have to get out of the way. So I think there's some truth in all of that. But the National Spasmodic Dysphonia Association, which I became aware of a couple years after I was diagnosed, went to their online help, not session, but they had a bulletin board where people could post. And this was like in 2005, 6 or 7. So it was before the internet was as big as it is right now. And so I found out more about it. And I went to one of their first meetings in 2009. But what they're doing today that is so exciting is there have been so many advances since I first started going to these meetings. In 2009, it was about, this is how we diagnose it. And there are 2 types of spasmodic dysphonia. One was what I had, which is the breathy voice, is where your vocal cords sort of spasm open. And the other one is called adductor, where your vocal cords spasm together. And then people with that have a very strangled voice, so they can hardly get their voice out. So they're almost 2 opposite things, but they both have the basic thing that it's caused by your brain. Your vocal cords are perfectly healthy. Yeah, so it's a neurological thing, but I would never say to like a stranger, I have a neurological voice. But a lot of people do. That we have a poet in our group, and before she does a poetry reading, she'll say to the group, now I have a neurological voice disorder, so you're just going to have to listen really closely to me. So everybody has their own thing that they say. I usually say, like I started to say with you guys, I said, I have some voice issues, or I have a bit of a flaky voice. Don't worry about me. Because people usually get this look of concern for me. They're like, and they're thinking, what's wrong with her? And is something bad going to happen to her? So I just try to put people at ease and tell them something. But the advances that have been made at the NSDA, just in less than 10 years, we've gone from describing, well, how do you diagnose it, to some fabulous research that is being carried out at universities all over the country and abroad. Not all of it is because of NSDA, but we have funded, for example, we funded one researcher a couple years ago with like a $40,000 grant, and she got such good preliminary data that in the next couple of years she got $1.2 million grant from NIH to pursue the research. And the interesting thing that these researchers are finding is that spasmodic dysphonia is related to other issues where the muscles spasm, such as writer's cramp. And what they found is that in these 2 disorders, if you look at the cell surfaces, there are molecules called receptors on the cell surfaces, and these receptors respond to messages coming to the cell. So what they found is that in spasmodic dysphonia, there are too many receptors on the surface of the cell. And where does this take place? In the part of the brain that controls speech. And similarly, with writer's cramp, there are too many receptors on the surface of cells. And what part of the brain do you think that takes part in? the part of the brain that controls your hand. So we're finding that this is not just an isolated voice disorder. It's related to all these other conditions where the muscles spasm. And this has happened I went to the meetings in 2017, and I was just floored by what they had been discovering. So when I say we, the NSDA, I'm talking about there are 2 paid people at the NSDA, and everything else is volunteers with spasmodic dysphonia. And these people are go-getters. They're lawyers, they're priests, they're business people. They have just got it going on. They're government employees, and they know how to get things done, and they're just wonderful people. So, and we talk about NSDA as we, not they. So, I mean, I'm not responsible for giving out the money for this research, but it's all related, and we have funded research, and this has led to other research, and they're also doing brain imaging where they can visualize what's going on in your brain. So they get volunteers, hook them up to electrodes, have them say certain words, and they can see what parts of the brain are lighting up. Yeah, and they're experimenting with deep brain stimulation to help people with spasmodic dysphonia and other sorts of muscle issues. And they're also looking at things where they can stimulate the vocal cords themselves in a pretty non-invasive way, just sort of give them a pulse of energy, I guess, for half an hour, and then the people can talk better. So there's just all sorts of advanced. The only treatments used to be Botox, which they would inject into the vocal cords. It interferes with the message that's going from your nerves to your muscles, and so your muscles don't get that message to contract. And it works better for the strangled voice, doesn't work as well for the breathy voice. So I actually have not used that treatment, but a lot of people swear by it.
So we are sitting in your wonderful living room here, and you have books, lots and lots of books. Tell us about how you've gotten this collection and where some of them have come from.
Okay, well, recently, I know books are on the way out, and some people just read everything on Kindle or something, but I still like books. And just recently, I know I don't need any more books. It's the last thing I need, but I went to 2 book signings last weekend, and one of them was by Glenn Ray Tudor, a local artist who is nationally known, and he had published a book not only of some of his paintings, but with an explanation, a wonderful explanation of what he was thinking about when he painted these pictures, and how he worked on what reflections was he going to put in the window, and what was he going to put the alley in or not, and what did the alley symbolize. Like he said, the alley symbolized the afterlife or something. I had no idea. I mean, when I look at one of his paintings, I just thought, wow, he's really good in the past. But to know what he was thinking is incredible. And then he had a picture of a chair, and he talked about in the interview and in the book about, who had held him when he was a baby in that chair, and how he'd used that chair to build a fort and whatnot when he was a child, and just how much that chair meant to him. So anyway, and then I went to another book signing I was telling you about with Clotilde Fitzpatrick. Yeah. And so she was someone I had heard about from one of my neighbors, and she's starting a school for kids up near Como. So I went and met her and bought her book and had it signed. Then while I was there, I saw local celebrity Chico Harris, also a friend of mine. He had a book, so I bought his book. So if you're wondering how I have a large collection of books, and then I just know a lot of people who have put out their own books, and I think it's so interesting, and I try to support them. Like on that thing is Panny Mayfield. She has a book on blues. She lives in Clarksdale, and she's been a photographer on that scene for a long time, so I bought her book. My husband likes to have sets of books, so if someone like Sue Grafton, she had a mystery for every letter of the alphabet. He collected every single one of those. So that's how our bookshelf gets filled up. But I've winnowed these books many times. So these are truly beloved or just fun books that I like. But I've had to winnow. And then my my neighbor and I have a thing where we exchange books with each other. And if I really like one, she'll say, well, why don't you keep it on your shelf for a while?
So you're a nature lover and you love land. I understand you also ride bikes, which is awesome. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'm not much of a bike rider. I'm more of a runner. I took up running 3 years ago, and so I go in to run at Patsy Park about 3 or 4 times a week. But I do sometimes ride a bike with my husband. We have a tandem bicycle built for 2. So we take that out I really like rails to trails these days better than riding on a road. So one of the rails to trails that we've come to love is the Tanglefoot Trail over near New Albany. So that's how we get to know New Albany just a little. We ended up there and we said, well, let's go look at this little town and see what's there. I run exactly 3.1 miles. I run the distance of a 5K. And I know I'm supposed to run longer to train, but and sometimes I do, but very, very short distances for me, very short distances. But I did find that I like the 5K and I like the competition of it and just the sort of the hoopla around it.
So have you run many 5Ks?
Yes, I run 4 or 5 a year for the last few years. I would really like to say something about my land, and that is that it's quite beautiful. We have 104 acres. We started off with buying an 80-acre farm when we moved here in 1987, and we lived in the little farmhouse down there, and we just loved it. We fixed it up a little bit, but it was still pretty cold in the winter and pretty hot in the summer. And eventually we were able to buy 25 more adjacent acres on the other side of the creek. So we have old hardwoods, we have 2 creeks, we have a swamp, and we have a farm pond, we have a remnant prairie. And I've kept a log over the years, because I'm a botanist, so I've kept a log of the plant species that we have here. And it's really pretty remarkable territory. So we started thinking, well, we just wanted some way to preserve it. And we'd heard about conservation easements. But at the time we asked our lawyer about conservation easements, and he said, oh, no, because you don't want to do that. Because I thought you could just write on it, and you will, this land will be conserved. But no, when we started thinking about it again a couple of years ago, it had proceeded a lot, and people knew more about it. And what a conservation easement is means that you give up the development rights to your property, and you have someone hold those rights. So it could be a state agency. In our case, it's the Nature Conservancy of Mississippi. So we've given over all our rights, and they're not going to develop it, and we're not going to develop it. But the way it works is they come out and look at the property. And when they came out, they just loved it as much as we did, because I had a book that I had made of pictures, and I showed that to them, and they just, they walked around with us, and they said, yes, this is something that we would like to be involved in. So over the next year and a half, we just talked about what will the easement be. It will be, it's like everything except the house and the old house will be protected. We can still have paths. You can't pave it. You can't have a sign. You can't have this and that. And we're not managing it for timber or anything like that. We're just managing it for different habitats. So we always want to have like a swamp, and we always want to have a prairie, and we always want to have hardwoods. And right now we have some former farm fields that are regenerating, and we just want to let nature take its course and see what will happen. So it took a year and a half to hammer that out, and the end of December last year, we finally signed off on it. So it's basically an agreement, and then they come out every year to sort of inspect the area and see how it's doing, and make sure that we haven't built a subdivision or something like that, that the thing has a conservation easement on it. I mean, I hope we can live here forever, but if we do sell it, or after we die, if someone else has to sell it for us, it still is a conservation easement. It doesn't matter who's on it. Yeah, it's a really fabulous thing. It's a wonderful thing. Along those lines, the people who had there's 6 or 7 entities involved. There's real estate people and everything else. One of them who had come out here saw a notice in the paper that the Natural Resources Conservation Service had out a request for a proposal to try to enhance habitat for a sort of unusual species of fish, the Yazoo River darter. And he sent it to me because he had read our agreement and he had seen that this is likely habitat. The likely habitat for it is about 1,000 square miles in the Yazoo River Basin, which includes us. And so I thought, oh, that'd be kind of neat. So I went over to the Natural Resources Conservation Office here in Oxford, and I asked them about it, and they told me more information about it. And later, they came out to look at the property. They're the naturalists. You know, he said, well, this is already pretty beautiful. There's nothing like the kinds of things they do to improve habitat would be dumping a big load of rocks. And they instantly caught on to the fact that I would not like that. But they said, well, but there is one thing that you might want to do, and it's called a visual stream assessment. We talked some more about it, and I applied for a grant to do a visual stream assessment. And that just means that you go and you look at your creeks, you look at the banks, you look at the vegetation on the banks, you look at the vegetation in the riparian area, which is beside the creek. You look and see, is the creek full of sediment? Is it full of algae? So based on all those things, you can determine the health of a stream. And by doing that, then the next step would be, if the health is good, then do we expect to find the Yazoo darter there? They also said, hey, you know, we could send somebody from the Fish and Wildlife Service out to Seine, you know, and maybe we'll find the fish there. So after a while, I got in touch with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they sent three biologists out, and we all went out, and they had their electroshocking equipment. Guess what the very first fish they caught was? The Yazoo darter, yes. So we have them in our creek. So that's one of my other projects that I'm doing.
Miss Wendy, this has been so informative. I've enjoyed visiting with you today. Thank you.
You're welcome, and I'm so glad that you could come out. Both of you could be here. Thank you so much for taking an interest.
And thank you for joining us here today. Let us know what you think about this interview and what do you think about Hill Country Network. And we thank you so much. We hope you'll join us next time.